These incredible men and women gave their lives to ensure that the world's #1 state sponsor of terror will never have a nuclear weapon. Oh, and they won't.
We have high gasoline prices. The Iranians look at that and say, okay, so we actually still have some leverage.
The president is at the White House working the phones. That is what he should be doing because of this war of his own making.
When you're digging a hole, you should stop digging. That's what this agreement sounds like.
When he was doing operations, they said he was doing too much. And now that he's in negotiations, they're trying to say that he's not doing enough.
Well, talking about Iran, the deal-making, what's happening, I just want to go back to the White House live shot there to explain that structure in the back. That is the setup for the UFC event on the South Lawn as they're building that in coming days. It happens in June. Wanted to tell you what that was. Meantime, right before this show, the president took to Truth Social and said this: the enriched uranium, nuclear dust, will either be immediately turned over to the United States to be brought home and destroyed, or preferably in conjunction and coordination with the Islamic Republic of Iran, destroyed in place or at another acceptable location, with the Atomic Energy Commission or its equivalent being witness to this process and event. Now, over the weekend, the president talked to a number of countries about the possibility of joining the Abraham Accords, in other words, making negotiation and normalization with Israel. They include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, and Bahrain. A couple of those already a part, of course, of the Abraham Accords. This all developing, but what Iran's response is the biggest question. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News chief political analyst Britt Hume, Politico White House bureau chief Dasha Burns, and John McCarthy, former senior advisor for political engagement for President Joe Biden. Britt, there's a lot of talk, and there has been over these days. It seems like things are moving forward, but every time you get two steps down to specifics, we hear from the Iranians, at least publicly, that it's not what is being broadcast.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this, analyzing it, as you showed in those sound bites, without really knowing what is in this deal, or if indeed Iran has agreed to the terms that the president has described repeatedly. I'm more inclined to believe him than I am to believe them, because they lie all the time, which raises the additional question, of course, of whether when they say something, even if they agree to something, can they be trusted to fulfill their promises? That, of course, is a continuing worry. But I think we need to let this play out before we opine as to whether this is a big victory or not. As for those nations joining the Abraham Accords, that would be quite something if you could pull that off. What I would say about that is I'll believe that when I can see it, but it's something to hope for.
Yeah. I want to play for you Secretary of State Rubio and then wipe it into the Iran Foreign Ministry spokesman with their response.
The president's not going to make a bad deal. He's just not. This issue, no one has done more, and no one has been more serious about the threat of a nuclear Iran than President Trump has been. And so I'm very confident, and we should all be very confident, that we're either going to have a good agreement or we're going to have to deal with it another way. We'd prefer to have a good agreement.
To say that we have reached a conclusion on a large portion of the issues under discussion would be correct. However, to say this means an agreement is on the verge of being signed is not something anyone can claim. The focus of the negotiations is on ending the war, and at this stage we are not discussing the details of the nuclear issue.
So, kind of reading through the tea leaves here, Dasha, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, look, the gap between what we're hearing publicly between the two nations shows just how fragile these talks really are. And look, right now, politically for President Trump, the goal immediately, the most urgent need, is to open up the strait and to calm the region and calm the oil markets. That is what Republicans in this town and all across the country are counting on. Of course, the issue, the reason we went into Iran in the first place, is the nuclear issue, but that seems like it is going to be pushed a little bit farther down the line to take care of that immediate issue with the strait right now. And, you know, we've seen the president continue to threaten military escalation, but every time there's been a fork in the road, he really has pushed for diplomacy, because we do see all of these political pressures at home that are factoring into the calculus here, Brett.
And this has been kind of a wheel here, John. This is Reuters. The Iran president orders the reopening of international internet access to Iran. Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has issued an order to reopen international internet access. Iran state media reported Monday, citing an official after a 90-day blackout in the wake of the war against the U.S. and Israel. But they're also reporting that the IRGC is pushing back, saying it's illegal for the Iran president to do that. And that is the tension that we've been seeing between those two forces.
Yeah, I mean, the tension that's continuing to play out just kind of feeds into the broader narrative, I think, that the president hasn't really been able to kind of bring the American people along with him on this one. There is next to no political support for this conflict. And I think if you're looking at this from a political angle, the people who are most anxious for this to be over are really Republicans who are up for re-election this November. Gas prices continue to rise. Instability in the region does nothing to help lower costs. So I think, as this plays out politically, the president will want to be able to wind down this conflict in hope of giving his numbers a chance to kind of come up again before November.
All right, speaking of politics, big race tomorrow in Texas, the Texas Senate race. Let's listen.
This really isn't just about me. This is about the Republican Party. This is about the state of Texas and what we built here. And I don't want to see it slipping through our fingers because of a flawed nominee.
What has John accomplished that's good for the state of Texas or the country? And you know what? No one's ever had an answer. Instead, we have to look to some of the bad things where he fought Trump on the border wall. It's time for a change in Texas.
President Trump endorsing Ken Paxton. AP writes it this way: although many of the counties Trump won in 2024 with 80% or more of the vote are rural and sparsely populated, collectively they made up about a fifth of the GOP primary vote. Again, this is in Texas. Paxton beat Cornyn in these counties 45-40, while Cornyn performed better than Paxton in the rest of the state. Only two incumbent U.S. senators from Texas have lost a primary in the last 100 years. This will be fascinating to watch. Britt, talk about the power of President Trump, his coattails, particularly in the GOP primary. But Cornyn's been around for a long time, and Texas knows him.
Well, an endorsement by the president has repeatedly proved to be a real leg up in these primaries. This is an interesting case because Cornyn really hasn't been an opponent of the president in any meaningful sense. I mean, the soundbite you played from Paxton pointed in that direction, but by and large, he's been an ally of the president. It's not entirely clear to me why he chose Paxton anyway. Paxton has a ton of baggage. The likely Democratic nominee does too. But I think, the widespread feeling is that the race is safer for the Republicans if Cornyn is able to win against the headwind of a presidential endorsement for the other guy.
Dasha, we always talk about Texas in recent elections being more purplish, that blue, Democrats think that they have a leg up, that this is going to be the race. But each time it's like Charlie Brown and Lucy and the football for the Democrats. It gets pulled away at the last second. What about this time as we look to this primary tomorrow?
Well, I think, and John can probably speak to this too, I think a lot of Democrats are thrilled by the president's endorsement of Ken Paxton. They believe that he is a guy that's easier to beat. The amount of phone calls, Brett, that I received from Republican sources after the president's endorsement there, extremely frustrated, worried that they're going to have to spend a ton more money and a ton more resources. Not necessarily worried they're going to lose Texas, but it's going to be much more of a fight, they believe, with Paxton versus Tallarico than Cornyn versus Tallarico. And the president's endorsement, I mean, it is unmatched what that can do in a Republican primary. The general election is different, and Trump is not going to be on the ballot, and the coalition that showed up for him in Texas and across the country will not necessarily show up for Paxton. So there's a lot of frustration on the Republican side, a lot of hope on the Democratic side, Brett.
Yeah, John, I want you to weigh in on that, but another candidate that is causing some uproar within the Democratic Party is Graham Plattner, and we have a live look of a Bernie Sanders event in Portland, Maine. He's up there on the stage, and Bernie Sanders is endorsing him. Plattner's gotten a lot of attention for kind of the wrong reasons. He didn't apologize to this Purple Heart veteran in this post where he says he didn't deserve to live. It's getting a lot of attention, much like Paxton's pass maybe in Texas is. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the path back to the Senate, candidate recruitment really matters and the type of people you're running. In Texas, Tallarico is really in many ways a kind of perfect fit for putting together a coalition that would involve disaffected Trump voters as well as base Democrats. Maine is another story. I mean, this campaign has kind of been a mess since the beginning. There's a lot of difficult challenges that he's going to continue to face from his own background and his own narrative. So I think he's going to have a tough problem there. I think there are really two big takeaways here. The first of which is, I mean, he was able to beat out, the sitting Democratic governor who's pretty popular. And I think that says that our primary voters are pretty upset. But to me, I'm concerned about, what this is going to say for the future of the Democratic Party. I want a Democratic Senate, but, how you win matters. And I think that there's a lot of real character concerns that he's going to have to explain to voters in Maine.
Yeah, we'll follow both. I think people in Texas may say the 6 genders and other things that in Tallarico's past may come up in the election as well. We'll see. Panel, thanks so much.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.